you and I were talking offline before we had this conversation, and you were sharing some really interesting things, kind of a little bit more about the industry that I really didn't know all that much about. And so you've been in this space for a while now, producing cows. Tell us what makes you different versus if I were to walk into my local store and just buy a ribeye from any, conventional store. What is the difference in, if nothing else, like the path of how that got from an animal to my plate, and some things you've learned about that over time.
Yeah, no, and that's an awesome question. I think is something that's unfortunately really hidden from a lot of consumers. And so the biggest difference right out of the gate is knowing where your meat is coming from, right? We really promote transparency on, where our meat's coming from, what we're doing with our meat, and all that other stuff. But one of the things that's a problem in the meat industry is the lack of labeling or at least accurately labeling. And what I mean by that is normally if meat was to come, say for instance, Uganda or something like that, right? Or Africa, whatever. That meat would come to customs with a product of Uganda or Africa on the label when it comes through customs. But then once it makes it into a packaging or a packer's place where it's processed, it's then taken that label off and a new label, USDA label is put on it, and then it's sold in the grocery store as, almost deceivingly as a product of US. And so that to me is very deceiving to the consumer. And the packers, um, they're having to pay less for that cattle being imported as opposed to buying a premium quality beef from the US market. And then that savings is not reciprocated to the consumer as well.
How prevalent is that practice? You hear about it that we get meat internationally, and there's a lot of things that come along with that, which we can discuss. But how prevalent, in your opinion, is that? Like, have I eaten a steak from Uganda if I've been carnivore in the last 6 or 7 years and primarily getting my meat from the grocery store?
Well, the chances are very high. I mean,
Very high.
I know we import a ton of meat. I think one of our biggest imports is actually Canada, but we're also importing from Mexico as well, and so there's many different places that you could be getting meat from. But at the end of the day, you don't know, right? So when you start asking yourself, maybe, hey, is this really a great deal I'm getting when they say it's 50% off? Why why is it 50% off? You got to ask yourself some questions about that. So again, I think just that transparency of like, what are you really getting? When you're purchasing meat at the grocery store, what are you really getting? Where is it coming from? What was put into that animal? All those different things are things I think are very valid questions and should support what you're buying.
Yeah, that's a great point. So you think about the cost, or what I would imagine the cost per pound of, beef coming over from Uganda. You're thinking, refrigeration, the processing itself, the transportation, the refrigerate, all of those things, all of those steps. I mean, that must be, if that's still less expensive than raising an animal here, I mean, that cost savings must be enormous.
Right. And I mean, just like you said, that whole process to get the animal from wherever it was to here, the shipping, the container, going from one hand to another, all of these different things. And you got to ask yourself, how was all that regulated on top of that? Was it really all that safe? It feels like yesterday we just got out of the whole COVID situation, and so it's like, you know, is that heightened our senses of, needing something more direct in the US for consumers?
Wow, that's very interesting. And in your opinion, is there a difference in Boy, would I say quality, nutritional quality from international? I know there's a difference. There's a big difference in the way the animals are raised. In the United States, we are extremely efficient. We don't have as many greenhouse gases. It's the rest of the world that kind of makes the average look a little bit worse than it is. So I know other countries obviously have different processes. They're probably not as good as ours. Is there a difference in the actual quality of the meat if you accidentally buy something that's international versus something that you know came from America?
So I don't know if there's any evidence that actually supports that. Just being frank with you on that, my I guess you could almost say biased opinion is yes, I do believe there is a quality impact versus U.S. Prime prime quality beef versus something that you have imported somewhere else. And again, it all stems from what are our regulations? Our regulations are pretty stringent. And so even when we are exporting meat, it's incredibly like heavily regulated on export meat, for high quality. So I would say if we are exporting meat to different countries that are requiring a high level of regulation and everything else, that would make me have a pretty valid argument to say that we have a very high quality beef that we're producing in the US.
Okay, well, thank you for clearing that up. Is there anything else we need to know about the conventional system as far as how most consumers buy their meat?
Yeah, it's one that's actually my favorite, and that's the color. Something that is always fascinating to me is whenever we butchered our own meat and everything, the color is not the color that you might think of. And so when you're at the grocery store, people always are really attracted to that really, really red look. And truth be told, that's not what it actually looks like. If you actually butchered a beef, in person, it's more of a darker maroon color. And that's been another thing that I think is kind of lied to the consumer. Obviously it's great eye candy to see that, nice red meat, but it's also a point of deception in the sense of one of the things that places will do to give it that color is they will actually uh, give it a carbon monoxide. Uh, it's not a dye, but it's basically a gas that they put on it to give it that really deep red color. And that deep red color will actually stay that color well past um, well past its freshness date, if you will. So you could have a bad piece of meat and it will still have that nice red color because of what they put on it. Now, what is different, possibly like if you were going to like a butcher or something like that, right? And you bought direct from a butcher, they will also have a pretty red, color to it. But that's because the meat's actually gone through a natural process as it's exposed to air. And as it's exposed to air, it will slowly start getting that deeper, that redder color that's appealing to people. So, little again, little difference there, little something that I think, again, consumers should really be thinking of. And I think the easiest way that you might be able to tell that, go and get a, value pack of meat, ground beef, for instance, and find one that you think looks really red. Take that home and just instantly break that open, and you will notice a significant color difference in the middle. And that's because it didn't penetrate nearly as deep. And what you see in the middle is actually more of what the color should actually look like.
Wow, very interesting.